But thankfully, there is some justice in the world, and definitely justice for women in the US at last. The Trump administration is dismantling the so-called trans-inclusive policies that really did nothing but exclude and disadvantage real women. The University of Pennsylvania has agreed to revoke the swimming titles of transgender athlete Lia Thomas. The university will also issue a formal apology to every biological female who lost out to a trans competitor. Now, the university was forced to do this because the Department of Education and their Office for Civil Rights found that the university violated Title IX by denying biological women equal opportunity to sport. Now, Lia Thomas was someone who was a biological male. She started doing hormones in 2019, switched from the male swim team to the female swim team, and then miraculously won the national championship. Yeah. This is a small step in the right direction, but it is huge vindication for the biological women who've been fighting for their rights for years. And to finally have an apology from the university and some justice, this is amazing.
Look, it's good to see that that's come. I have no doubt they were dragged there kicking and screaming in many ways. But I feel for so many of the women who have actually ran these races, swam these races already, been involved in these sports and not had the opportunity to be successful, not have the opportunity to win. Now, these titles might be removed so that their name goes up on the list now, but at the time they never got the ability to enjoy success or experience that win, and that was what was taken away from these women. I hope universities, sporting clubs and anyone else who thinks that this is appropriate, that biological men should be allowed to compete in sport with real biological women and just declare their gender, that this isn't going to continue. Look, I've always felt if people are trans and want to compete in sport, that's fine, but let's have an open division. Let's have you can have a separate division if that's what they need, where these people can go and compete, not necessarily putting them up against biological women. But I do feel for the women who lost out on the opportunity of having a win and being successful.
Well, there have actually been attempts by some sporting codes to have a transgender division, but there was very little interest, naturally, because you're catering to such a tiny portion of the population. Yeah. So, Joe, in Australia, we really don't have any protections for women's sport, and you're starting to hear of some cases where you do have trans athletes beating biological females. Is it time we look at better protecting women's sport here?
Yeah, I actually feel really sorry for the majority of trans people, because I think they've been sort of swept up. I think there are those who have absolute, genuine gender dysphoria, who completely feel like they were born in the wrong body, and it's been hell for them for years and years and years. And, finally there's an element of recognition, there's an element of medical expertise that can intervene and, deliver them from a life of just horror and pain and possibly even suicide that we can't even imagine. And yet their cause, I think, has been taken up with such kind of militant activism that it's actually been counterproductive for them. And I think the case of trans women in sport is just a really, really good one. The idea that you could have someone who was a failed athlete or a relatively unsuccessful athlete in one sex, and because sex and gender are two different things, and then transitions and becomes another one and is suddenly very successful. You don't have to be a cold-hearted, Sherlock Holmesian logician to think that something's maybe a bit sus about that.
Biological advantage.
Yeah, that's right. Clearly that is. Yeah. And so, and again, you could say, and then you have people say, no, you have to accept this, you have to accept all of this, you have to accept it without question, otherwise you're transphobic. And I just think, and then people are obviously going to get their back up.
Left-wing activists being extremist
that's right, and that's the whole problem.
But it's the same with,
that's right, and it's the same with all this moronic, academic stuff where these people just sit around.
Where's for Palestine?
In knitting circles and African drumming circles and just sort of whittle away theoretical sociological theory until they come up with 72 genders and say, all right, you have to accept that there are 72 genders, otherwise you're transphobic or you're not with science. And again, people are just going to say, well, in that case, F you, I'm not taking any of it. And that cuts out you know, the vast number of the people who are absolutely, you know, and same with the elements of contagion where people just sort of decide they're, you know, trans fluid or whatever it is, and then decide, actually, no, I'm not after all because I want to settle down and have kids.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like we're kind of moving back to a common sense position where reality and biological reality prevails.